Okay guys, welcome to our inaugural video of the year. I'm just going to go straight through our test review. I haven't done it yet, so I might need to pause a couple times just to kind of get my bearings real fast, but I hope you guys will find this helpful. You don't need to watch straight through. If you're doing great with sine and cosine graphs, you can skip around a little bit, but I'm just going to go straight through this. I noticed that on this there isn't, so down here we're asking you to identify things from some graphs. But just kind of like the quiz, as you're going through stuff, you might need to identify the A, B, C, and D for each one, and I'll just do that at the top. So I'm just going to go straight through this. Remember, when we're graphing sine and cosine, I've kind of been going through this process of we're going to dab first. That's going to get us through our setup. Then I'm going to plot my 5 points. If I need to do a phase shift, I'll do a phase shift, and then I can finally connect. Okay, so we're going to start by dabbing. Remember the D, when we have an equation, so we have something like y equals, oops, I'm already messing up, a sine of b x minus c plus d. When I'm dabbing, these are the things about. So D is my vertical shift. It's my center line. So when I look at this, I'm noticing that I have a center line at a positive 1. I'm shifting up 1. So I'm just going to do my tick mark, or sorry, my center line with my dotted line. Remember, in math, dotted lines are a way of telling the person who's reading our graph, this isn't part of my final function or graph. It's just helping guide it as I draw it. A is for amplitude. It's this number in front of the sine or the cosine. Mine's 2. So from 1, I'm going to go up 2. From 1, I'm going to go down 2. Remember, this number isn't necessarily what numbers are going to be here. It's telling me how high above and below I go from this center line. Okay? So I have D, I've done my A, now I have to do my B. Well, my B is this number here. Mine's a 3. So remember, this 3 here tells me that I'm going to have 3 cycles in 2 pi. And if I want to get to the period, I take 2 pi and I divide it by b. So this tells me that in 2 pi, I'm going to really stretch this out, I'm going to have 3 cycles. Okay? And if I divide this by 3, I get to 2 pi over 3. Remember, period is telling me how long each individual cycle is. So my first number, of these 3 tick marks should match with this number because I have to get a whole cycle in this amount of space. So I have 2 pi over 3. If I go another 2 pi over 3, I get to 4 pi over 3. Okay. And I need to fit a cycle within each of these. So notice within each of these, I need a full cycle. So I'm going to highlight these to show this is where each cycle should start and end. Well, in each cycle, I need my 5 key points. Remember, so I'm going to break this into, I know it's a little weird, we're going to break it into 4 because I'm going to have my start, the 3 in the middle, and the end. Those are my 5 key points. So again, we'll use this again. So start, the 3 in the middle to the end. So I break it up into, there's 3 tick marks in the middle, gets me 4 sections and 5 key points. Okay. We said we have to label all of the points in our first cycle. So I just do this by cutting this number in half. It's the same as multiplying by a half. I'm going to get pi over 3. It's half of 2 pi over 3. Half of pi over 3 is pi over 6. And then we count. 1 pi over 6, 2 pi over 6, 3 pi over 6. Now, technically, 3 pi over 6 simplifies down to pi over 2. I really don't care if you simplify that, but we just need to label them. Okay, so I've dabbed, which means I can now do my 5 key points for the first cycle. Well, sine starts in the middle, so I've got middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. And remember, my middle isn't on the solid line, it's on my center line. I can't connect my points yet because I have to figure out if there's a phase shift. That phase shift isn't C. We have to factor out the B to get it. But I'm using this number. Well, notice there's no parentheses and there's no adding or subtract inside those parentheses, so I don't have to worry about a phase shift, which means I can connect. And then I'm just going to keep going through the pattern. So I've got my top, middle, bottom, middle, top, middle, bottom, middle. Whatever my last one is should match with my first one. So notice I started in the middle, I ended in the middle. That's a good way to check to see if you missed any points. Okay. I'm just going to check some things really fast. Yeah, my amplitude's 2. Notice I went, so I'm before a top, so I've got through a full cycle. That's 1, 2, 3 full cycles. Okay. Let's do another one. 3 cosine of 1/2 x. Okay, so I'm going to dab first. Notice there's no plus or minus here, so my center line's right here at 0. I'm going to do my A. My amplitude is 3, so from 0 I go up 3, and from 0 I go down 3. Okay. Half, that's my B. This is telling me that I'm going to have a half a cycle in 2 pi. So a period is going to be 2 pi divided by 1/2. Well, dividing by 1/2 is the same as multiplying by 2. So a period is 4 pi. When we graph, we either graph the number, the whole number of cycles inside of 2 pi. If we have a fraction, we're going to go through 1 full cycle, which is my period. So since this is bigger than 2 pi, I'm going to graph all the way out to 4 pi. Okay? I only have 1 cycle in 4 pi. So from this, I'm going to get my 5 key points. I need to label them. This is half of 4 pi, which is 2 pi. Half of that is pi, 1 pi, 2 pi, 3 pi. So I've dabbed because I've done all my labeling. I do my 5 key points now. So I've got 1. So, oh, sorry, it's cosine. That's a mistake, so I can put a little X through it. Cosine starts at the top, middle, down, middle, top. Can't connect them yet. I have to look for a phase shift. Well, notice the phase shift, remember, comes from the C after I divide it by B. I don't have any parentheses, and I'm not adding or subtracting inside of any parentheses, so I don't have a phase shift, so I can move straight to connecting them. So I'm going to connect down. Remember, it's going to kind of look like U's anytime you're above or below your center line. So there's that U and that U. Okay, that's it. We had a half of a cycle in 2 pi. You'll notice I didn't get through everything. I needed to go all the way to 4 pi to get a full cycle. And these are all of the things I need because I just needed my 5 key points once. Okay, let's do number 3. We're going to dab first. Remember, you can pause at any point, go back and watch something again. Number 3, I'm going to dab. There's no plus or minus after the parentheses, so I'm at 0. Ooh, this got shifted a little. A is my amplitude. It's 2, so I'm going to go up to 2, and I'm going to go down to -2. Okay. B is my period. It's this number in front of the X. Okay. So since there's going to be 2 cycles in 2 pi, which means there's going to be 1 cycle, which is what my period is, in pi. It's my period. So because I have multiple full cycles, I'm going to go out to 2 pi, and I'm going to break it into my 2 cycles. Okay. Each cycle needs its key points. I find by cutting it in half and then halves again, that makes my spaced out as evenly as I can get it. Sometimes when you guys eyeball it, they don't get spaced out super evenly, so I would maybe try my method. I had to label everything in my first cycle. So half of this is pi over 2, of that is pi over 4. So 1 pi over 4, 2 pi over 4, 3 pi over 4. Remember, dab just sets up. It gets all my labeling done. So I've dabbed. Now I'm going to do my 5 points. So sine starts at the middle. So I'm going to go up, middle, down, middle. Not even going to go through the whole thing. because I can't connect them yet because I actually have a phase shift, and I know that because I have a minus or plus something inside the parentheses. I'm going to grab a different color real fast. What do I've got here? I guess I'll use green. Because before I can handle my phase shift, I have to factor out this 2, and I'm going to do that by dividing 2. So I'm going to write y equals 2. Oh, my poor green pen. Oof. Let's see if this one's better. There we go. Y equals 2 sine of, now I factor out that 2. I divide this by 2. I have x left. Well, let's think about what happens when I divide this by 2. So remember, I have a pi over 2 over 2. Well, if I'm dividing by 2, it's the same as dividing by 2 over 1. I'm just turning that into a fraction. Because remember, when I divide by a fraction, I can multiply by its reciprocal. I flip this upside down. So this is going to get me to pi over 4. This, after I've factored, is my phase shift. That means all of my points need to go over to the right. Remember, when things are in parentheses, we do the opposite of what we think. When it's minus pi over 4, we go to the right. So all of my points need to go to the right by 1 tick mark, because 1 tick mark is pi over 4. Okay, so this is going to go here. This is going to go here. This is going to go here. And then I'm just going to start following the pattern. Notice I go up, middle, down, middle. So I'm going to have an up, middle, and then I'm going to stop at the down. I also have to go the other direction. So notice I'm going up, down, up. So I need to end on a down. And remember, I told you wherever you start is where you should end. So that's good. Now I can connect. Okay. The screen's a little sad too. But I have 2 full cycles. Notice in pi, I get a full cycle. And then from pi to 2 pi, I get a full cycle, 2 cycles. Okay. I think we're doing good so far. On a tangent, woohoo! Okay, there's no shifts here, meaning there's nothing to the right, left, up, or down, but I do have this 1/2, and it's in front of the x. Just like when I'm dealing with sine and cosine, this is find my period if it changes. But the thing to remember about tangent is tangent, without any shifts, has a period of pi, not 2 pi. So this is telling me that I'm going to have a half of a cycle in pi. So if I want to know what the period is, I'm going to do pi divided by 1/2. Well, the same as multiplying by 2. So this is my period for tangent, okay? The first thing that we do for tangent is we remember that my place where I cross through the center line or have a 0 is at 0. And then whatever this is, I go half the distance on one side. So half of that is pi. And half the distance to the other side. That's going to be my negative pi. And that's where my asymptotes are going to be. So I start in the center unless I have a phase shift. Okay. Oopsies. And I'm going to go half of this way and half of this way. For tangent, we still have the same types of points. We're going to have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But I'm not going to make you label these middle ones. But what we did say is when you go half the distance between a center and an asymptote, you're going to go the amplitude. Well, there's nothing in front, so I'm going to go over half the distance, up 1. Backwards half the distance, down 1. Okay. Well, I told you guys I always want 2 cycles. So notice the distance from here to here is pi. So I'm going to go that same distance again to get to my next 0. I'm going to go that same distance again to get to my next asymptote. So I went over pi. So from the center to the asymptote, I go over pi. From the asymptote to the center, I go over pi. To go from the center to the asymptote, I go over pi. Okay. Half the distance this way, I go up 1. Half the distance this way, I go down 1. tangent. On the test, you're not going to ever have to do more than, I believe it's 2 shifts at once for tangent. So I believe the next one has 2 shifts. So I'm going to move on to the next page. Okay. 3 tangent minus 1. Okay, remember, there's no number here in front of x, so that means my period is just going to be pi. Okay? So I'm going to do, I'm going to go in blue first, and then I'll make green my final answer. Because remember, for tangent, we start at the center. And then we're going to go half the distance this way. So that's going to be pi over 2 this time. Half the distance of the period this way. That's negative pi over 2. And that's where my asymptotes are. Now, I have to think about my shifts real fast. I don't have a phase shift. That's what moves me side to side. So my asymptotes are good to go here. Okay. But this is telling me that everything I do has to be shifted down 1. So if it helps you, if you even want to put in a negative 1 here, if you wanted to put that in, you could. I don't know that I would, but I know some teachers and some people do. So instead of starting here in the center, I need to start at my center line, which is negative 1. This tells me my amplitude. So as I go over half the distance, I need to go up my amplitude. So from negative 1, I have to go up 0 to 1 to 2. From here, when I go back half the distance, I have to go down 1, 2, 3. That's going to get me to negative 4. Mine's a little silly looking. But you can see how it stretches it. Okay. The distance from the center to the asymptote was pi over 2. So if I go that same distance, another pi over 2, I'm going to go that same distance to get to my next asymptote. When I go half the distance, I go up 3. And when I go half the distance, I go down 3. That gets me to negative 4 again. Remember, you have to label all of your zeros, so the places where you cross the center line, and your asymptotes, except for 0. We know what the origin is. So there's some graphing. Now we're going to do number 2, which is finding the period, phase shift, and vertical shift for each question. It really should be another thing here, so I'm just going to add in some lines. So let's just do all the vertical shifts real fast. This vertical shift is down 5. This vertical shift is up 3. Oop, there's nothing after the parentheses, so there's none. So you can either put a line or you can put none. Okay. Let's do the let's do the period next. So notice this has a 1 in front, which means I have a 1 cycle in 2 pi. Well, that's the magic number. So my period is 1 cycle in 2 pi. It's the length of 1 cycle, so it's 2 pi. Okay. This is telling me that I have 2 cycles in 2 pi. So to find the period, you have some options. You can say, what do I need to do to this to turn it into 1? To divide it by 2? But we have a formula. Let's just use that. The period is 2 pi divided by b. Well, if you simplify that out, you're going to get pi. Okay. So here's this here. My period is 2 pi divided by whatever's in front of the x.